Hey, I'm Alexandra Harbushka, founder of Life With Herpes. Today we're going to talk about how to get diagnosed with herpes. Okay, we're going to talk about how to get diagnosed with herpes, and I know you're like, but I don't really want to know. It's something I never really wanted to know. I never really wanted to get herpes, and I never really want to know how to get diagnosed with herpes. But I want to talk about this because this is something I get questioned daily, if not multiple times a day, whether you think you have herpes, that might be why you're watching this, because you're like, I think I have herpes, or it might be, okay, I was diagnosed, but is it accurate? How do I know my test is right? Did they test me at the right time, the wrong time? How do I know what type I have? So there's a lot of things that actually go into testing. Really quick, it is important to know if you have herpes. If you do think you have a lesion or a blister or something, like, go get checked. You're only going to support yourself, your health, as well as a partner and a future partners. So do it for your health and your partner's health. It's really important to do that. All right, there's 3 types of tests. There's 3 things that happen when you get tested or go to get tested. The first way is a clinical diagnosis. So a clinical diagnosis is when your doctor or your medical professional is able to look at your signs, symptoms, and even look at your outbreak and say, okay, that's herpes. So they're gonna look at it, see how you're feeling, and diagnose it that way. This is a way that was done way in the past. They didn't have some types of tests. They didn't have like the medical technology that we have today to be able to like differentiate or actually take a sample. So number 1 would be a clinical diagnosis. Step 2, or second way to do it, not step 2, but another way to get diagnosed with herpes would be to get a blood test. So the blood test is actually when you go in for a blood draw, and there's 2 types. There's IgM or IgG, and basically what these are antibodies. What we're looking for in our blood, I'm using this arm because this is my good vein arm, just so you all know. My left arm is the vein that everybody likes. So there's our body gives or makes the antibodies once the virus has entered into our body. So really quick to make sure we understand, the herpes virus does not live in our blood. It's not a blood disease. It lives actually in our nervous system and it lives along our spine. But what it does do is it makes antibodies. So the IgM antibodies are made typically first, and they don't last as long. So typically if it's a brand new infection, you might have the IgM antibodies. They will definitely be the first ones to show up, and you may never get them again. So it's usually with your first outbreak. Then the IgG antibodies would be the ones that say, okay, this person has herpes, it's in their system, it's not a new outbreak. The more outbreaks you have, the more IgG antibodies you create. So again, what we're looking for in a blood test is the IgM, IgG antibodies. And then the next type of way to get diagnosed is to actually take a culture. It's a viral culture of the lesion or the outbreak, whatever you want to call it. So what's happening at that point is someone's actually scraping some of the stuff, the DNA, the viral DNA, and actually sending it to a lab. So they're looking at it either under a microscope or running some tests on it to see if what you think you have is herpes. So those are 3 ways. They all have a lot of pros and cons. So the clinical diagnosis is awesome because it's fast. So you can just like look at your signs, symptoms. There's no paperwork. Well, there's paperwork, but there's no lab work. The downside to doing a clinical diagnosis is you don't know what type you have. So there's no way for a doctor to say, oh, that's HSV1 or that's HSV2. They're just going to say, oh, you have oral herpes or genital herpes. Some pros and cons about getting the blood test done are kind of like I mentioned, the IgM or IgG. You have to have had herpes in your system long enough in order to create these antibodies. So for example, if you were just exposed to it, like let's say I had an oral outbreak and I kissed you right now and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get oral herpes, and you go straight down to your doctor and you're like, give me a blood test. It's gonna come back negative unless you already had herpes. It's most likely gonna come back negative because my body hasn't had enough time to create those antibodies. The good news also with it though is that you do know what type you have. It'll be able to tell you if you have type 1 or type 2, which is great. Another downside though, if you never have had an outbreak, you're not gonna know where the location is. So if they just tell you like, hey, Alexandra, you have HSV1, I can go like, well, where? Is it oral or genital? And if I've never had an outbreak, I'm not gonna know. Okay, and the third way, like we mentioned, is doing a swab. And again, some pros and cons to that are when you have an outbreak, you obviously know where it's located, like you would know if it's oral or genital. But a con is if you do it too soon or too late and you actually swab it, the blister could have healed and the DNA could have kind of gone away. So for example, if you were to swab my mouth right now, I have HSV1 oral as well as HSV2 genital. But like if you were to swab my mouth right now, it would most likely come back negative because I do not have an active outbreak and I'm probably not shedding at the moment. So again, you could swab someone and they'd be like, oh my gosh, do I have herpes? Well, you really need an active lesion in order to get an accurate result. The good news is you will know what type you have versus what type, 1 or 2. All right, so those are the 3 ways. They all are great depending on where you are on your herpes journey. For me personally, if you're in like a quick bind and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm freaking out, I need to talk to somebody right now, I recommend Herp Alert. I absolutely love Herp Alert. I have been fans of theirs. I have known them, I think we're going on 4 years. And Herp Alert is the first and only telehealth company that is dedicated just to herpes. So you can go online right away, fill out your information, fill out your symptoms, upload an image, and a doctor will clinically diagnose you right away. So that is great. I use them personally when I need a refill of my prescription. They also can refill your prescription for you. Again, they have doctors that are waiting to refill it right away and it goes straight to your pharmacy. So for me, it is the best way to get diagnosed. If they do have other questions, because I've asked, I'm like, well, how do you know? Like sometimes people don't know if it's herpes. They will then refer you to somebody else to go get a blood test or a swab or whatever the next step is. Anyways, they are my favorite. Go to herpalert.com and you could use the promo code Life With Herpes, all one word, to get a 10% discount. Like I said, they're awesome. Like they're my friends. I just want to give them a hug. I love them. All right. Thanks for joining. Subscribe. Let me know what else you guys want to see. I will create topics around this. I love being here for you and educating you on herpes. I will see you in the next video and have an awesome, awesome day. Bye.